Hello, everybody. You are all welcome to our discuss panel with discussion with the author. We will today discuss the book about the insight of the Muslim Brotherhood, who is written by Holly Inany, who is with us today. Thank you very much to joining us, Khalil. He is joining to us from America. We did our iftar, but he's woke up a little bit before.
Yeah, still have 8 hours or 6 hours for iftar, inshallah.
Okay, thank you very much joining us, Khalil. Thanks a lot, and let me introduce you to our audience attendees. Dr. Holly Inany is an associate professor of political science and the chair of politics and international relations program at Doha Institute for Graduate Studies in Qatar. He previously taught at Johns Hopkins University, Georgetown University, George Washington University, and George Mason University. Mashallah alayk, ya doctor. And Professor Inany, his research focuses on the intersections of comparative politics, particularly authoritarianism and democratization, sociology, particularly sociology of religion, which we will discuss today, Muslim Brotherhood, and social movements. His research interest spans comparative politics, democratization, Middle Eastern studies, religion and politics, Islamic movements, social movements, Egyptian politics, politics, and Arab world. Thank you joining us, Dr. Khalil. We will today discuss with you one of your recent books about the Muslim Brotherhood. Actually, I am really happy to discuss with you such an important subject. As we know, Muslim Brotherhood wrote a history in the Muslim world. They are one of the main social movement which take 100 years after history, and but nowadays they have a troubles after the coup d'etat in Egypt, especially. And they are in exile now in England, in Istanbul, in Qatar, in USA, and now we will discuss with you with your book. Let's start with your book and your how you come to this book. How this idea to come to write the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh in the beginning. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Kokhan, for this invitation. I'd like also to thank the Turkish Center for Global and Area Studies for inviting me for these talks. It's a privilege to be with you tonight. I also would like to wish you and all of the attendees and all of those who are watching us Eid Mubarak, inshallah, that we will witness in the coming few days, inshallah. Just one clarification, in addition to your generous introduction, I'd like to add that I am now affiliated with the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. as a senior fellow. Just a small addition to the introduction. Well, first of all, each book had a story that needs to be told. And let me start with you and with the attendees by telling the story of this book, which is not that quite recent, as you just mentioned. It was published in 2016, so a little bit, old, 4 years ago. But the story of the book started, I would say, 15 years ago, specifically when the Muslim Brotherhood, or Ikhwan, won around 20% in the Egypt's parliamentary elections in 2005. At that time, this was the biggest victory for an opposition movement, let alone an Islamist movement. So they won 20% at that time. And despite the fact that was not the first time for the Brotherhood to participate in elections, yet it was the biggest victory for them in decades, particularly since they came back to political life in the 70s. So they won 20%, no matter if this 20% is influential and can affect the legislative agenda or not, but it was a big victory given the circumstances of Egypt at that time. So at that time, I started to think about the Muslim Brotherhood as a political actor, as a social movement. And what struck me, in fact, when I started to read about them, I couldn't find really good scholarship about them. If you go back and look at the literature, at least at that time, you would find a handful of good books. And by good books, I mean books that were written from academic perspective, not from a political perspective. You can find two contradictory scholarship on the Brotherhood that were written either by the Brotherhood themselves, by the leaders, like autobiographies of their leaders. The main one that was written by Mahmoud Abdel Halim, which is very known encyclopedia of the Brotherhood. It's called Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun Ahdath Sana'at al-Tarikh. It was published in the 70s, 3 volumes, 3 big volumes, and it discussed the foundation of the Brotherhood since 1928 through 30th and the 40s. On the other hand, you would find those books that were motivated by political stance and ideological stance from the Brotherhood. Those who are anti-Brotherhood, those who are opposing the Brotherhood ideologically and politically. So it's difficult to find objective data or objective analysis. It's always driven by political animosity against them. So it was very surprising to me that at least on the Arabic world or the Arabic version of books, you cannot find objective and scholarly books on the Brotherhood. In the West, you can find a couple of good publications. The main one is the one that was written by Richard Mitchell, late 60s. And it's a very foundational book. It's very good, but it is old and outdated book. It was a PhD dissertation in the early 50s, and it was published maybe 15 years later. So you cannot find really good scholarship when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood. Also, I cannot, I don't want to forget or to overlook the good book that was written by Professor Kerry Wickham Brzezinski. It's called Mobilizing Islam. It was published 2002, if I'm not wrong. So you can find only a couple of books that were really discussing the Brotherhood from an objective and academically perspective. So this was one of the key motivations behind my work on the Brotherhood. I felt that as Egyptian first and as a scholar, we need to have a piece of scholarship that will try to deal with the Brotherhood as they are, yes. Not coming from either a political stance against them or with them. Try to do my work as a researcher in the first place.
Is it the reason that you wrote the inside of the Muslim Brotherhood, Doctor?
Absolutely. And let me also mention some of the attendees might not know that I published a book in Arabic about the Brotherhood in 2007. And when I went to do my PhD at Durham University in England, frankly, I went to do something else. I went to write a different dissertation from the one that I wrote about the Brotherhood. I was planning to write something about the social construction of fatwa in everyday life, meaning how fatwa informs and directs Muslims' everyday life. And I was planning to explore the role of Dar al-Ifta in Egypt. This is the main body that issues fatwa for Muslims, either in Egypt or beyond Egypt even. But I couldn't find a good supervisor. So I had to shift my focus to go back to work and to continue my work on the Muslim Brotherhood. So I started to work on it as a PhD dissertation at that time. And I tried to take a different angle from what has been written on the Brotherhood. So if you look at the scholarship on the Muslim Brotherhood, you would find either a scholarship that would focus on the political activism of Ikhwan, how they participate in elections, how they engage in public life, or those who focus on the social services provision of the Brotherhood, meaning the charity activities, the educational activities of the Muslim Brotherhood. Or you would find scholarship that would focus on the Brotherhood's relationship with the political regime and how they operate in repressive environment in Egypt. But there is no work about what's going on within the Brotherhood. So my book was trying to answer two key questions. The first one, how individuals become ikhwan, how they become members within the Brotherhood. And the second question is, what does it mean to be an ikhwan in everyday life? How this kind of ikhwan identity informs and directs your everyday behavior and thinking and world views. So there was not much work about this. And to be quite honest, it was not an easy task to do. It's very difficult to conduct research about underground clandestine movements such as the Brotherhood, which also, when it comes to security obsession, is very high. It's very difficult to build this kind of confidence and trust with its members and leaders in order to get accurate information. Also, sometimes you need to compare what you hear from the leaders from what you might hear from the grassroots. So they might be, you might have different views from both sides. So it was not an easy task, but I said, it's very important to have this work that would give some insights to what's going on within the Muslim Brotherhood, how they construct their identity in everyday life, how they managed to operate under a very repressive regime during Mubarak. So the book was a journey to understand what does Brotherhood mean in everyday life. So this is a very brief background.
Yes, Doctor. During that, I read your book, and you start with the social movements theories and essentialist approach to the social Muslim Brotherhood, and you asked a very good question. If you can answer this question, actually, this is you answer in your book, but for the audience, how can we study the Muslim Brotherhood actually as a as a Jama'ah, let's say?
Okay, this is a very important question, Dr. Kokhan, and I'll take a step back, or I will zoom out and put it within the context of studying Islamism as a political phenomenon in general. When I did that, and this is also one of the key reasons behind me going to look at what's going on within the Brotherhood from a scholarly perspective. If you go back and look at the literature on Islamism as a political phenomenon, which most scholars would agree that it emerged in the late 70s with the Iranian Revolution onwards, you would find two key currents or strands of scholarship. The one that is called essentialist approach,
yes,
which deals with, which conflates Islam with Islamism. And those advocates of this scholarly trend would think that Islam cannot be reconciled with democracy and with modern values. They think that the problem is not in Islamism, it's in Islam. So Islam has an inherited anti-modern and anti-democratic thrust. So Islamists would be the same. And there are many names that I would only mention a couple of them. For instance, Daniel Pipes and Bernard Lewis. These are two key figures, and also you can include with them Bassam Tibi, a German scholar from Syrian origins. He was that they would conflate Islam with Islamism. So they have this kind of essentialist approach in dealing with Islamism. On the other hand, you would find what can be called as a contextualist approach that would deal with Islamism as only a reactionary or a reaction movement to the problems that wrecked the Arab world since the removal of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. So the problems of the modern states, if you like, problems of unemployment, urbanization, poverty. So for them, Islamism is only a reaction to these problems. It doesn't have any specific worldview. It's just a reaction to these problems. And you can find also several scholars would adopt and embrace this approach. So I try to, to find a more accurate way to understand Islamism before going to study the Brotherhood. So it was very tough, frankly. That's why I had to combine different theoretical approaches in order to be able to better understand the Muslim Brotherhood. So I used, or I employed 4 types of scholarships to study the Muslim Brotherhood, because it's a very multifaceted, very complicated phenomenon. For instance, you cannot classify the Brotherhood as a purely religious movement. It's not a cult. It's not a denomination, as is the case in the West. Also, you cannot classify it as a political party or a social movement only. You have to come up with a comprehensive approach. So I used 4 theoretical frameworks that would make me able to study the Brotherhood. I started from my specialization, comparative politics. So I tried to look at how political actors would operate within a repressive and authoritarian environment. Then I started to look at different aspects of the Brotherhood. So I used social movement theory, particularly when it comes to the construction of collective identity in everyday life. Then I used sociology of religion as a way to understand how religion is manifested in the Brotherhood ideology and discourse. Then I used social psychology in order to understand the transformation of individuals' identity and moving from this individual level to the social level to the collective level. So I tried to combine different theoretical frameworks in order to come up with a frame that can explain and understand the Muslim Brotherhood. So I had to use different theoretical scholarship in order to be able to understand and to unpack and to deconstruct the Muslim Brotherhood as a socio-political religious movement.
Yes, and Doctor, I will turn to the questions. Dr. Samir Abdulaziz asked a question. I will turn this question as well. But in a group, he said, he make a contribution and ask, or maybe this is not a question, but this is not a comment, but maybe we have to discuss on this issue. He said that he think the Muslim Brotherhood quite believe in the modern system of countries, but at the same time they have an upper umbrella they are dreaming with. This makes a big conflict nowadays. Of course, we will turn this. Turn to back your book. You are speaking about, here from self-identity to the collective identity. And you start with as well, you start how an individual could be a, Muslim Brotherhood or Ikhwan. Let's discuss about this issue. How do you see? Is this an individual identity, or is this, as Dr. Samir Abdulaziz said as well, an upper umbrella? I mean, a collective identity for the people.
Okay, let me differentiate between 2 different aspects of your question. The first part is about the transformation of individual identity to collective identity. But the second aspect, I think Dr. Abdulaziz here is referring to the transnational aspect of the Brotherhood, how they operate all over the globe. For the first part of your question, Dr. Kokhan, when it comes to the construction of identity, each one of us has different layers of identity. So for instance, we have individual identity, which is who I am. I am Holly Inany. I'm an Egyptian. I am a scholar. I am married. I have 2 kids. This is my individual or personal identity. But then all of us also have some sort of social identity, which means that we have social relationships, either within our families or big family, within our workplace, within our university. So now you move into this kind of social aspect of identity, or the social layer, so to speak. Then if you join a political party or a social movement or any other organization, it comes the collective identity that you would become a part of a bigger movement or a bigger organization. So my book and my research was trying to examine and understand how individuals move from this individual level of identity to become very active in a bigger group and to have a sense of collective identity. So I used what's known in social sciences, the social constructivism theory, and I relied mainly on the seminal work of Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann's great book about the social construction of reality and how identity is constructed in everyday life. As you might know, identity is not something given or immutable. It's something socially constructed from interactions. It starts with us from very young age through our upbringings until our old age. So it's a process of socially constructed values and norms in everyday life. So I had to dig deep on the Brotherhood and look at how they construct the collective identity of the movement. So I looked at different mechanisms, different tools, including the code of values and norms, like, for instance, al-bay'a, the allegiance, like iltizam, commitment, like loyalty, al-wala, like obedience, at-ta'a. So I had to go through these values and deconstruct them and understand how they shape individuals' identity and match them with the collective identity of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it was a very complex process. Also, the different venues, like al-usra, for instance, the family meeting, like when they come to the different meetings at different levels, for instance, they have this course called a nadwa, seminar weekly, or they have this kind of camp that would happen once in a while. So these are what I call, it's in Arabic called mahadin al-tarbiyah, the incubation venues that would reshape the identity of individuals and to take them from this individual level to become part of a collective actor or collective movement, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. So this was the process of constructing identity in everyday life for the Brotherhood. For the second part of your question, if I understood it correctly, the question was about the Brotherhood's and transnational identity and aspect. And this is a very confusion, honestly, topic. And some people would say the Brotherhood doesn't believe in modern state or doesn't believe in nation state. Some would say that they believe only in a caliphate type of a state. And frankly, the Brotherhood themselves, they are not sure about their position from the nation state. So you would find some of them would say that we aspire to have some sort of Muslim unity. It doesn't have to be a caliphate, the name, but some sort of Muslim unity that would include Muslims around the world. You would find others that would say, no, we believe in nation state and we should only focus on our nation states. So Brotherhood in Egypt focus on Egypt, those in Tunisia would focus on Tunisia, those in Morocco, in Turkey, everywhere would only be local movements. To what extent this is true when it comes to reality? So the Brotherhood, they used to have what's called a Tanzim al-Dawli lil-Ikhwan al-Muslimin. And for me as a scholar, it's more of an umbrella than anything else. And I'm trying to avoid this kind of political debate around this, because the current authoritarian regimes would use this umbrella to accuse the Brotherhood that they have a global agenda and hidden agenda. They would like to dominate the world and this kind of rhetoric. But in reality, the Brotherhood, they have, or they used to have in the past, within their bylaws, a bylaw about تنظيم الدولة للإخوان المسلمين. It's there. But when it comes to reality, each branch is operating individually to the extent that some regional branches, they disassociated themselves from the Brotherhood. For instance, the Brotherhood in Jordan, in Kuwait, Hamas, in Palestine, in Tunisia, they declared, or they announced clearly that they are not anymore part of the Muslim Brotherhood umbrella. This might be a political move, it might be ideological, but there is no such link when it comes to organizational aspect. Yes, they might share some common views about the role of Islam in public life, about they might share some ways of preaching and how they run their activities. But when it comes to organizational aspect, I don't think there is such link between the Brotherhood movement, the mother movement in Egypt, and its branches around the world. So the question of transnational aspect, to be frank with you, it's very confusing, and it is the Brotherhood's responsibility to clarify this to the audience.
Ustaz Anani, you discuss after all this theoretical aspect, actually it is still theoretical, but you discuss about Hassan al-Banna. And here Hassan al-Banna and his legacy, and during his view, what can you say? What he, brought to Muslim Brotherhood, and I will come to the power of the Jama'ah, which structure, make a structure, with the aims, objectives, and means. What you can say about Hassan al-Banna and his view, his mission, or his objective?
Okay. Look, when I try to look at the impact of Hassan al-Banna on the Brotherhood and Ikhwan, I can say that until now, there is no other scholar or leader who has an impact on the Brotherhood such as the founder, Hassan al-Banna, at all, for different reasons. We can discuss them later. But when I try to understand Hassan al-Banna's ideas, and hello?
Yes, yes.
Following? Okay, because I can't see you. So I thought I was disconnected. All right. So when I try to look at the background of Hassan al-Banna and how he came to the idea of establishing the Brotherhood, I try to look at the political and the social and the cultural environment where al-Banna came to be impacted by. And I found very interesting aspects. The first one, during the early of the 20th century, Egypt had at least 100 Islamic organizations. I can't remember the number, maybe 113 Islamic organizations. Like, for instance, جماعة أنصار السنة المحمدية or الجمعية الشرعية. These organizations, or جمعية الشبان المسلمين, all these organizations were established before the Brotherhood. And so the question that came to my mind, why al-Banna chose to establish another movement, instead of joining one of these existing movements? And one of the key elements, hello? 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 Dr. Kokhan, are you listening?
Yes, I'm here now. Sorry.
Okay. That's right. So and the question that came to my mind, why Al-Banna chose to establish the Brotherhood instead of joining one of the existing movements. So I found that one of the main differences between the Brotherhood, or between Al-Banna's views and those movements, is that these organizations were apolitical, that they were not interested in politics at all. And at that time, if you remember, Egypt was under occupation, British occupation, and was a subject of different cultural influences and missionary influences coming from the West. So that fact struck Al-Banna and pushed him to establish the Brotherhood. Al-Banna was not a traditional scholar. So he, in his early age, he went to Kuttab or Madrasa type of education. But then he decided to study in a modern school. So he went to Dar al-Ulum in Cairo. And this was a big jump for him. And I think this is one of the main reasons that affected his worldview and ideas. So he started as a Sufi kind of guy. He joined Al-Jam'iyya Al-Hasafiyya that was established by Abdul Wahab Al-Hasafi. This is a Sufi sheikh. It has a branch in his village in Al-Mahmudiyya. So when he moved to Cairo, he was exposed to different political, cultural, and religious views. So he came to the point that he needs to do something that would go beyond these organizations. So he established the Muslim Brotherhood. For me, I used to call Al-Banna a social entrepreneur. He's not a traditional scholar. He's not only a political leader, but he is this kind of a person that would influence people by his simple kind of discourse and his extraordinary organizational capabilities that would that helped him to establish such a strong and disciplined movement in 1928. So Al-Banna, since that time until now, he put the foundation of the Brotherhood that is still the Brotherhood is following until now. And this would raise the question, to what extent this foundation or this organization is still valid, or this kind of organizational structure is still valid. I think this is a question that the Brotherhood needs to answer. Al-Banna had some views that would fit his environment at that time. To what extent these views are still valid until now? This is another question the Brotherhood needs to answer. But as I said in the beginning, you cannot find a heavyweight scholar and leader that would impact the Brotherhood in Egypt as Al-Banna did almost a century ago. And this raises a question, why the Brotherhood could not produce other innovative and smart people like Hassan Al-Banna when it comes to building a strong organization, when it comes to his political skills, when it comes to his even inclusive discourse. The Brotherhood has changed over the last 4 decades. And I think when I speak with the Brotherhood, particularly the old leaders that left the movement, they would complain from the current leaders. They would say that these leaders are not following they are not following Al-Banna's ideas. They drifted from Al-Banna's ideas. So you can find this kind of debate within the movement about who is really following Al-Banna's ideas and views.
Yes. Doctor, there is a question from Moe Ali, and it has been asked, does this international body of Muslim Brotherhood exist in reality, or just some shared ideology?
I think I partially answered this question, but let me repeat what I said. As I said, in reality, there is no such connection between the Brotherhood's branches. So as I said, each branch is operating independently from the Brotherhood in Egypt, to the extent that some of them even distance themselves from the Brotherhood. They are saying that we are not Brotherhood anymore. So Rashid al-Ghannouchi, for instance, he said that we are not a Brotherhood branch. We are not even Islamists. He said that. He said that we are Muslim Democrats now. The Brotherhood in Jordan, after the 2013 coup, they also dissociated themselves from the Brotherhood, so that they said that we are not a branch of the Brotherhood in Egypt. The same happened in Kuwait. In Morocco, the story is different. From the beginning, they are saying that they are not Brotherhood even. But at the same time, some of these movements, as I said, they share some of the Brotherhood broad views. As I said, like the role of Islam in public life, some tools of preaching, Islamic teachings and ethics and values. So when it comes to organization, at least from my perspective, there is no such thing. There is no such organizational body that combines all Brotherhood branches in one thing. Despite the fact that I said they had what's called التنظيم الدولي للإخوان المسلمين in 1980s. They established that thing to be an umbrella that would coordinate between different branches. But over the last, I would say, 20 years, there is no such thing in reality.
Yes.
As far as I know.
And Dr. Samir said that he agree with your umbrella metaphor, and he said this is controlling the main peaceful stream of the group and making an international trend that can influence the world agenda. And for the audience, please write not a big comment, because I don't have enough time.
Hello? I think I lost you again, Dr. Kokhan.
Yes, sorry. I'm coming.
It's not from my side, yeah?
Yes, it's because of my internet. I have no idea, but sorry about this interruption. But let's go with your book, and the other question now about the power of Jama'ah. You have there is a very good show table. I will try to show the audience as well. I will turn back to this table because I would like to show the audience as well. After all, I would like to ask you about your, this recruitment of brotherhoods. You have a very nice, interviews with the people. Brotherhood is a, social movement that they targets individuals from different social strata. How they ensure or how they, the social identification or socialization. Let's speak about the recruitment of Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay, so this is a very big topic, and I try to be brief on it.
Yes.
I call the Brotherhood strategy on recruiting, chasing the prey, which means that the Brotherhood, the social movement, they have a very rigorous and unique process of selection and recruiting. And before I delve into more details, I would make a very important theoretical point here. I think this is one of the contributions of my book. As I said in the beginning, I try to use social movements approach in studying the Muslim Brotherhood. However, there are differences between the Brotherhood and between the literature on the social movements, at least in one aspect. So in social movements, individuals can join once they show the interest. For instance, if you are a person who is interested in environmental issues, you can join a social movement that is advocating for environment's rights, for instance. Or if you are have an interest in human rights, you might join a social movement that would advocate for this. Or if you have interest in peace, you might join a social movement that advocates for peace. It's not the case with the Brotherhood, and I think also it's not the case with other Islamist movements, which means that you don't join, they select you. And this is, I heard this explicitly, and I put this as a headline at one of the chapters, that they don't, you don't join them, they select you, they recruit you, they reach out to you, you don't go to them. So to achieve this, they have a gradual process of recruitment, and they have different circles for recruitment, and everything is written in the book. But I'll just try to summarize it, that the attendees can have an idea about this. So they have this small level, or small circles called a da'wah al-fardiyya, which means that each member of the Brotherhood would go and preach the Brotherhood views and ideas in his very small circle. Let's say if you are a teacher in a school, you try to speak with your students about Islam. And here is a very important point. In the beginning, the Brotherhood doesn't really show that they are organized movement. So if you're a Brotherhood member and you would like to preach, you don't tell the person the first time you meet him that you're a Brotherhood member. You speak with him about Islam. And also they have mechanisms of detecting those who might be future members. So they don't go to anyone and try to recruit him. They look at those people who might be devout, might be pious, might be religiously committed. So they start with them to speak with them about Islam in general, about Islamic values and teachings, and how important Muslims should follow these teachings in everyday life. And if they found some sort of positive response from you, they will go to the next level. They would invite you for, let's say, a soccer competition, for instance, a soccer game, or invite you for a book seminar, or invite you just to have a cup of tea and to have a discussion with you.
Which you say general connectivity, right?
Yeah, that's right. So this would take me to the second level, general connectivity. That would they would reach out to the entire society without specific persons. And then once they detect those who have this kind of religious commitment and background, they would further go and try to recruit them. As I said, they have different tools and they have different mechanisms of doing that. And this would take me to explain more, and you might have a question about this, about the membership system within the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood doesn't have one system in a place. It has different levels of membership. It depends on individuals' commitment and adherence and allegiance to the movement. So they have what's called this is the very first level, muhib or muayyid, supporter.
Yes.
Right? And this is those who are sympathizer with the Brotherhood's ideas and views. And this is the very first level of recruitment. Then they have what's called muntasib. So this is you go. It's like a ladder or steps. So you start with the step 1 as a supporter. Then after a while you go to the second step, which is affiliated or muntasib. That you would have more tasks to do and to conduct, and someone would observe you and see how you are doing with these tasks. Then they have what's called muntazim, which meaning the more organized, more committed person that would be part of the organization, meaning that he or she would pay subscription, monthly subscription. He or she would vote in internal elections, but he or she doesn't have the right to run for office within the Brotherhood. Then it comes to other levels called the active level, العضو العامل داخل الإخوان المسلمين. This is the fully-fledged membership that members would have all rights and would bear all responsibilities. So and this kind of membership system, it's very complicated, and there is no clear limits, frankly, or boundaries for them. And when I did the interviews with the Brotherhood members, some of them, they don't know even which level they are in.
You have actually Mustafa Meshur's table in your book, you know. There is a stage which start with the, please correct me if I'm wrong, from the selection to affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
Only this table show us actually how is a complicated issue to affiliate the Muslim Brotherhood. If we speak about the tarbiyah and the Muslim Brotherhood's identity, can you explain a bit about the tarbiyah and the consolidating of identity?
Sure. Tarbiyah is one of the key elements when it comes to the consolidation of the Brotherhood identity. And by tarbiyah, I mean tarbiyah, one of the key activities. If we would like to draw a map to the main activities or aspects of the Brotherhood, we can speak of 4 key activities. The first one is the preaching, making da'wah. Second thing is education, which is tarbiyah. Third aspect or element or activity is charity. And the fourth one is political activism. So the second one is very important because it guarantees that members would move from what I discussed in the beginning for our discussion, from the individual level of identity to be part of a collective movement. So they would make sure that individuals have this kind of strong commitment, not only to the Brotherhood ideology and views, but also to the leadership of the movement. So they have different venues. And I said in the beginning, very briefly, what's called mahadin al-tarbiyah, the tarbiyah incubators or incubations.
Incubation model of Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they start with this kind of family gathering that would happen maybe weekly, that would discuss different issues. It has some rituals, like reciting Quran, for instance, and studying some of the hadith, some of the tafsir, and also discussing some public issues. And then they have they have al-usra, then they have a nadwa, the seminar. This might be every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. They have the camp, they have the battalion, they have different venues that would consolidate the identity and make individuals' identity match with the collective identity of the Brotherhood. So, I mean, there are many details in the book. If anyone is interested to know more, he or she can read about this.
Yes, you have, this venues of socialization.
Yes.
You have a daire, and in the center of the daire, you have a usra bil Arabi, I mean, in the family. And then around the family, actually you show from the sociology, you show us the socialization theory, and from the trip or camp or workshops or seminars, congress, and some khatiba, which is actually very nice to show us the venues of socialization. I mean, the tarbiyah in the Brotherhood.
Yes.
And we have a lot of questions, but the last 1 is outside the book. Let us finish the book, and after that I will ask him about, the other questions. I know that these questions are very good. Maybe will help Dr. Anani to extend his book in the future as a second,
third, you mean?
Yeah.
Because I have one in Arabic, one in English. This will be the third.
Okay, inshallah, the third one.
But not anymore about the Brotherhood.
It's okay, brother.
Maybe other topics. Other topics.
And
I'd like to give a chance for other scholars to continue what we did, inshallah.
Inshallah. And can we speak about the structure of the Brotherhood? You speak organizational structure of the Brotherhood.
I mean, it's. I think many people now know this. I mean, in the past, when I first did my book, I mean, my first book in 2007, there was not much information about this, about what is the structure of the Brotherhood? I mean, we only see al-Murshid al-Alam, but underneath this level, there are many other levels that we had no idea about them until recently. So I have a chapter in the book looking at the structure of the Brotherhood. And I mean, it might not be something new, particularly for those who are studying the Brotherhood or those who are members in it. But just to put it simply, they have, I believe, 6 or 7 levels of organizational structure. That starts with the al-usra, as I said before, family that is composed of between 5 to 7 people, that they meet weekly. They have some rituals. They study some religious texts, and they discuss some public issues. Then they have Shu'ba, which is composed from maybe 5 to 6 families. So you're talking about maybe 40 to 50 people that they would meet maybe once a month to discuss also different issues. Then they have al-Mantiqa district that would combine or to be composed from 5 to 6, maybe 7 Shu'bas. So you're talking about 150 to 200 people. Then you have the administrative offices. This is the governorator's offices. In each governorator in Egypt, in each province in Egypt, you have an office that is running the Brotherhood activities. And it has a board that is elected. So the head of the office and the deputy and the members of the board. And then you have the legislative body of the Brotherhood, the most important one, or one of the most important ones, Majlis al-Shura al-Aam, the council of Shura al-Aam, the General Council, that is elected from the province's offices or the administrative offices, that is composed from around 118 to 120. It differs from one to another, but I would say approximately 120 members that they are, most of them are elected. I think 95 of them are elected, and 15 are appointed by the General Guide or the Supreme Guide. This Majlis al-Shura al-Aam is responsible for 2 main things. The first one is electing the Guidance Bureau, Maktab al-Irshad, and the General Guide, al-Murshid al-Aam. And on paper, Maktab al-Irshad is or should be held accountable before Majlis al-Shura al-Aam. But in reality, it was not the case. The Maktab al-Irshad used to be the most powerful body or institution within the Brotherhood, sometimes at the expense of the Shura Council. I think this is one of the reasons behind problems within the Brotherhood. The boundaries between the Shura Council and the Guidance Bureau were not clear. And then you have the General Guide, who is sitting at the top of the movement. So this is briefly the structure of the Brotherhood, which, by the way, which is very interesting, it has been there for a century now, with very minor changes on the structure, which this structure at one point was helpful to the movement to be resilient and to endure different waves of repression. At the same time, it became an obstacle for evolving and for reform and for a change. And we can talk about this later if there is any question about this.
Yes, I have a question. You mentioned as a term, Ikhwanism. What is Ikhwanism, first of all, for you? And after that, you discussed the institutionalization of Ikhwanism in the Brotherhood. What does it mean?
Okay, Ikhwanism is a code of identity that combines different values and norms that each one within the Brotherhood has to commit and to follow and to obey. And I discussed this in the book, and I also alluded to it very briefly in the beginning of our discussion when I spoke about the different norms and values, such as allegiance, al-bay'ah, such as obedience, al-ta'a, such as commitment, iltizam, such as loyalty, al-wala. So these are the values and norms that create the code of identity that Brotherhood members have to commit and to follow in everyday life. So now you're talking about unique identity that can be called ikhwanism. So to be a Brotherhood member, you have to have or to adopt this code of identity, which is ikhwanism. This is very simply. So how the Brotherhood institutionalized this kind of identity, as I said, through different mechanisms. Within the incubation process, each member of the Brotherhood has to commit to these values. So each level within the Brotherhood, and you can talk about two axes of relationship. You have the horizontal axe, and you have the vertical axe of the Brotherhood. So you have this structure that I just mentioned. At the same time, you have this code of values that would cut all these levels in the structure. So the Brotherhood members, they have to follow these values. So the Brotherhood is trying to institutionalize this by infusing these views, these code, these norms and values in each level of the structure and in each venue of incubation, like al-usra, al-nadwa, al-mu'tamar al-aam, al-mu'askar, all these things.
Okay. And Doctor, I will turn to these questions, but before that, as a last question from your book, I would like to ask you, and I will like to, connect with this nowadays, today's issue. You have discussed the Brotherhood under the regime of repression.
No. Yep.
This is very important now. We are seeing now in Egypt, like a king of the repression. I mean, with the compare of the last century. Can you explain us a bit, the experience of the Brotherhood, their experience, or under the repression?
Definitely. As I said in the beginning, I'm a political scientist, so my main specialization is about authoritarianism and democratization. My research focuses on examining how political actors and social movements respond to repression, how they adapt to it. So one of the main sections in the book is looking at how the Brotherhood could endure and live under repression during Mubarak. Of course, the book was published in 2016, but it was written before the coup of 2013. So I covered mainly the 30 years of Mubarak from 1981 until 2011. In the conclusion, I put a section about what happened to the Brotherhood since the coup and afterwards. But in the book, looking at how the Brotherhood responded to repression, it was very interesting to look at how the repression influenced the internal dynamics of the Brotherhood. And I found out that the Brotherhood at some point would use repression to create solidarity and coherence within the movement. I'll give you one example, for instance. The Brotherhood went through a very repressive experience under Nasser in 50s and 60s, where thousands of the Brotherhood members were arrested, similar to what we see now in Egypt, maybe in a different scale. We don't know yet. We might need to wait to see and to compare between repression under Nasser and under Sisi. This might be a topic for researchers to study and to examine. But the Nasser regime almost crushed and eliminated the Brotherhood. So in a prison, the Brotherhood started to speak about sanawat al-mihna, or the adversity or the ordeal kind of years. And you can find literature about this. And some of the leaders think that repression is ibtila'un min Allah. It's a test from Allah, and they need to push back against this and to endure this test. However, under Mubarak, they would use this, what I call in my book, mihna narrative, or ordeal narrative, in order to deflect any calls for a change or reform within the movement. So if there's, let's say, a member in the guidance bureau asking for a change or reform, he would immediately be dismissed by saying, we are living under mihna now, under Mubarak. We didn't have time for reform or to change. So this kind of narrative had a very strong impact on the internal dynamics within the Brotherhood. Also, repression played in favor of the Brotherhood in order to get support from the wider society in Egypt. So people would be sympathized with the Brotherhood because they are under repression always, and because they sacrifice. Well, this doesn't mean that the Brotherhood, they wish to remain under repression in order to gain support and sympathy. No, but this was the situation during Mubarak. So the book was looking at, which is I think unique and something novel, how repression impact the internal dynamics in the Brotherhood to the extent that some conservative leaders would use repression in order to refuse or reject calls for a change. And I also discussed this kind of, I would say, a very simple categorization about the different currents within the Brotherhood. And you can come up with different classifications, but the most common classification, no matter it's accurate or not, is between what's called conservative wing and the reformist wing. I mean, for me, I cannot speak of a wing or a trend. I can speak of individuals. You can name a few people who really had reformist ideas on the Brotherhood over the last 3 decades. At least since the fourth general guide, Mustafa Mashhour, who came to be at the top of the Brotherhood in mid-90s. Since that time until now, the Brotherhood is under the control of the so-called conservative leadership. And by conservative, I mean those who focus mainly on the organization and how to survive, more than on how to be engaged in politics. So survival is a crucial issue for them. The organizational survival itself is a priority that might come at the expense of other issues. But those who call for reform and for a change, which I mentioned, just a handful of people, very few people who call for a change. Like, for instance, the ex-member of Brotherhood, Dr. Abdul Manab al-Futuh, for instance, who used to call for a change before the Brotherhood kicked him out when he announced that he would run for presidency in Egypt in 2012. 2012. So you cannot talk about really a strong or powerful current that would call for reform within the Brotherhood. So we need to understand the internal dynamics within the wider context of authoritarianism and repression that happened under Mubarak regime from 1981 until 2011, when Mubarak was removed by the popular uprising of 2011.
Yes. That was it. I mean, about the book, Doctor. We have some other questions from the audience. I would like to ask these questions. And one of them is, actually it is nice, Kerem Özsürlü from Turkey, I know him. And he asked that, why do you think that a large movement like a Muslim Brotherhood emerged from Egypt and not from other Arab or Islamic societies? What makes Egypt so special, actually, Doctor?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, you need to go look. You go back and look at.
Actually, this is for you. Is the it's a very nice question because you lived in Qatar and you know the Turkey and you lived in UK and US.
Yes.
You can compare this issue.
Yes, sure. That's
what makes Egypt special except
sure.
the koshari.
Well, the simple answer is Dunya, right? But yes. No, seriously, if you go back and look at the circumstances in the turn of the 20th century, Egypt was the main country that everybody, I mean, intellectuals, journalists, thinkers would come to Egypt at that time. So Egypt was special by the intellectual and political life that existed at that time. So it's not surprising that the Brotherhood emerged there. Despite the fact some people would say that Al-Banna, he got the idea of the Brotherhood from reading in the Islamic tradition and from reading in other literature. Someone would say that he got the idea from the Muslims in India. But Egypt was unique at that time. If you look at for instance, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, I mean, Muhammad Abdu, the reform movement that emerged in the late of 19th century and became very influential across the Muslim world, it had its birthplace in Egypt. So it's not surprising that Al-Banna came to this idea. And frankly, in the chapter about Al-Banna, you can look at the different influences on him. So some people would consider him as an extension to the reformist movement that emerged, that was led by Jamaluddin al-Afghani, Muhammad Abdu, then Rashid Rida, then Al-Banna. Some people would consider him as the continuation of this movement. So Egypt at that time was a very hot place for political debate, for intellectual interactions. So it's not surprising that this led to the emergence of the Brotherhood. Also, as I said, Al-Banna tried to combine between the religious aspect of the movement with the political aspect, with the nationalist aspect. And it's not surprising that he established the Brotherhood after he went and lived in Al-Ismailiyah, which is where the Suez Canal was controlled by the British. And he was struck by the fact that he was living in the middle of a westernized city. So this was striking to him and was motivating him to go back and establish the Brotherhood. So you need to look at, in the micro level of analysis, and look at the context of the establishment of the Brotherhood. This might help answering the question of why Egypt, not in other places.
And there is another question from Mohammed Said Al. He's coordinator of at our center. He asked, actually, from your view, after the Arab Spring, Muslim Brotherhood confronted in Egypt, Tunisia, or Yemen with the Salafists. What is the main divergence between Salafi movements and Muslim Brotherhood for your point of view?
Well, this is a key question about the diversity of Islamist movements. You have a wide range of movements that they use Islam as a reference in everyday life. And to be specific about Salafism and between the Brotherhood, I would say Salafism, they are more of literalist in their understanding of religion. So they adhere to the traditional and original exegesis of Islam or of Quran and Sunnah, Generally speaking, they are apolitical, so they are not interested, or they used to be not interested in political activism, at least, if we're talking about Egypt, at least until the uprising of 2011. They didn't have the same organizational structure that the Brotherhood has. For example, they don't have the same recruitment process that the Brotherhood has. I'm talking about the main features that would differentiate between both of them. The Brotherhood is more engaged in public life. They are keen to participate in elections, vying for public office, contesting with other political parties and movements. It's not the case with the Salafism. Salafism is more of, I would say, quietest kind of movement. They don't engage in politics as such. Of course, Salafism is not only one thing, by the way, also. I mean, Salafism is a very also, for me, it's a very vague term. And there is no clear boundaries about these different types. And within Salafism, you can find different strands. You have, for instance, what's called the Salafiyya al-Ilmiyya, scientific Salafism, those who focus on mainly on religious education, mainly. You have the Salafiyya al-Jihadiyya, for instance, those who adopt jihad as a main tool in political change. We have Salafiyya Taqlidiyya. So you have different strands of Salafism. So when you say Salafism, I mean, you need to be specific about what do you mean by this. You have political Salafism, for instance, the one I wrote about. The main example of this is Hizb an-Nur in Egypt and Ad-Da'wa Salafiyya in Alexandria. They became very politicized after the uprising, and I wrote a journal article about this, co-authored with another scholar. So you need to be specific. What do you mean by Salafism when it comes to comparing to the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yes. Thanks. Thank you very much for this answer as well. And other questions from Abdullah Aydın. He's a professor from Antakya University. And his question about the effects of the Muslim Brotherhood on other Islamic movements in the world, especially non-Arab, like Turkey, Iran, or maybe Southeast Asia.
Yes.
Yes. And I connect another question to this as a second. The effect, the influence of Muslim Brotherhood very deeply outside Egypt. I mean, non-Arab or Arab countries.
Okay. So the Brotherhood has branches in around 77 countries. This is what they are saying, at least. But it definitely has different branches, and this started from the early days of the Brotherhood. So if you go back and look at, for instance, the Brotherhood in Sudan or in Syria or in other places, they were established in the mid-40s, and then it spread all over the Muslim world. One of the key tools of this was those students who came to study in Egypt, particularly in Al-Azhar, and they were exposed to the Brotherhood at that time. And we need to remember that the Brotherhood in 30s and 40s was a legal movement, was a very active movement, social movement, very big, massive social movement that has many members. It has a lot of activities. So it was not the case as we have it now. It was not illegal or banned. It was legal movement, at least until 1948, when the first ban came, and then the second ban came in the 50s. So the Brotherhood was influential. Hassan al-Banna himself had a very strong connection with different leaders. So, for instance, when he went to make Hajj in Saudi Arabia, he met with many Saudi officials. There, he used to write letters to King Farouk in Egypt, for instance. Some people would say that he was very close to the palace, to the regime at that time. He had influential connections with different national leaders in different Arab countries. again, we need to remember that the Arab and Muslim countries were under occupation at that time, and the priority was how to liberate Muslim world from the occupation. So Al-Banna came with this idea of Islam as a comprehensive way of life that would include political, social, economic, cultural aspect of life. So his idea was unique at that time, and this is one of the main ideas that made Al-Banna, as I said at the beginning, a social entrepreneur. That a very smart guy came with this idea of comprehensive Islam. That Islam is not only in the masjid. Islam is a way of life. I mean, regardless how people define this, I mean, you can find different differences about how you understand the role of Islam in public life. But at that time, he came with this idea. So his idea resonated with many Muslims around the world that were seeking a leadership, particularly after the removal of the Ottoman Empire. And this is very important and a crucial factor in the success of the Brotherhood, that you have a huge vacuum of leadership when it comes to the Muslim world. When Al-Banna came, he became very influential. He tried to spread his message, to recruit people, either inside Egypt or outside Egypt, and then it started from there. So it's not surprising that the Brotherhood had this impact all over the Muslim world. Another thing is also is related to the strategy and the tools of the Brotherhood. Again, they have this kind of gradual approach for a change. So they start with individuals, then families, then society, then the entire country, then the entire ummah. So this gradual approach resonates also with many Muslims around the world. So if someone else came with the same idea, he might have the same success that Al-Banna had when he established the Muslim Brotherhood.
I see. Another question is, Doctor, from Mo Ali, and the question is, why Islamic movements present themselves always in parallel tracks with the state or good substitute?
So if I got the question right, so he's talking about the competition between the state and between the Islamist movements, or between. If this is the question, I would put it in the wider context of the modern Arab state, or the so-called Arab state. And let me take a few minutes to speak about this, at least from my perspective. I think the Arab world failed miserably in establishing a nation state, at least on the Westphalian kind of sense. There are many attempts to establish a nation state, but for me, most of these attempts have failed miserably. Why? For a very simple reason. All these attempts excluded people from establishing the state. Always the vision for nation state comes from the top, and it was not the case.
Dr. Anani, I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Doctor? I can't hear you. Can you hear me, Doctor? How about the sound went mute. Doctor, quit and entry, okay? Get out and get in second. Once again. No, there is no voice. Please get out the program and yes, you. Re-entry once again. Wait, okay? Don't.
Hello? You hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's okay. We will discuss it later on. Okay, no problem. Continue. Let's continue.
Okay.
I forgot what I was talking about, to be frank with you. Can you remind me?
Yes. We were talking about the competence between the competition between the state and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes, that's right. So I was talking about the idea of the modern Arab state, and I was saying that for me, the Arab world could not until now, or could not succeed until now, to establish a nation state in the civilian sense. For one main reason, all attempts to establish this state came from the top, from the rulers, from the intellectuals, and the society was not part of establishing this state. If you go back and look at how the European nation state came to be, this was through a very long and complicated conflict, either between the rulers and between the society, or between different aspects of societies, like lords, like nobles. So the society was a very important player in this game. In the Arab country, in the Arab world, there was no such thing. Always the state's vision is imposed from the top to the bottom. So the societies and the countries and the people were not part of this process of establishing a nation state. The only chance that the Arab world had to be part, or the only chance that the Arab people had to be part of building their own state was with the Arab Spring. And we all know what happened with Arab Spring and how things changed. And that's why the counter-revolution tried to do, by putting people back to be away from contributing to the establishing of their states. So when it comes to Islamism or Islamists, like any other political party, they were excluded from inclusion, or from political inclusion. So look, for instance, take the example of Turkey, for instance. Islamism in Turkey suffered exclusion until, I would say, 80s and early 90s. The same can be applied to Egypt, to Tunisia, but not only Islamists. We are suffering from a chronic authoritarian structure of power in the Arab world, at least since the middle of the 20th century. We didn't have a solid and a successful attempt to establish a democratic state that would include all different political parties. But if the question is about to what extent the Islamic or Islamist ideology is reconcilable with the nation state, this is something else. At least if you look at most of the current Islamist movements, they don't have any problem with nation state. They are operating within the context and the boundaries of this nation state, in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Turkey, everywhere. They are part of the nation state. But it's about to what extent political regimes are willing to accept them to be part of the political fabric. This is the question that should be answered by authoritarian regimes in the Arab world.
Okay, Doctor, there were some other questions, but I lost all of them. What can I remember? Saiful Islam has written a question. Dr. Abdulaziz wrote a question. Please write it again if you are still with us, because we lost more than 30 attendees.
Just give me 1 second just to put the power in the computer, if you don't mind. If you excuse me, you are and the other attendees. Just 1 minute, please.
Okay. And I am not sure who are with us, but Saiful Islam, you can write once again your question. But Mo Ali contributed another question: how such Islamic movements would transform into legal entities or work under legitimate state institution?
Again, should I answer this?
Yes. Contribution of the competence between the state and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Again, this question should be answered by the state itself. As I said, in Egypt, particularly in Egypt, the state has excluded not only the Brotherhood from the political process, but also all other political players. If you take, for instance, Egypt under Mubarak, the main political party that was dominating the political life in Egypt was the National Democratic Party, the NDP. Was a very minimum participation of liberal, secular, leftist, or Islamist parties or movements. So the problem of the Brotherhood is not, I mean, apart from the Brotherhood's ideological issues, the problem in Egypt is not about Islamists per se. It's about the authoritarian structure of the state that was put in place since 50s until now. So if you have a democratic state, an open political space, you would find all political parties competing together, and the people and the society would judge these movements. The problem is that in Egypt, after the revolution of 2011, for the first time in Egypt's history, Egyptians had the chance to elect for the first time a democratically elected government. However, for many reasons, I don't want to get into this, but for many reasons, this experience was erupted and was ended by a military coup in 2013 that ended the entire democratic experience. Despite all its problems, there is no democratic transition that is not rocky and problematic. All transitions have problems. The challenge is how political parties and how state institutions accept the transition, maintain it, not to turn against it. And this is the case in Egypt. So the question of including the Brotherhood should be asked and directed to the authoritarian governments, either in Egypt or outside Egypt. The problem is that for instance, when they came to power, the Brotherhood, I believe they didn't have the chance that they would make people be able to judge them accurately and justly. They only remained in power 1 year. Their performance was terrible, definitely. They failed in addressing many things. There is no doubt about that. But you cannot end the entire experience because you don't like your opponent. If you take the US, for example, I don't think that the US would have a bad leadership as it has right now. But you would never hear someone saying that the military should go and take power because they don't like the current leadership. You cannot find that, right? It's not the case in the Arab world. The political culture is not as democratic and liberal and tolerant as it should be. And this is applied to all political parties, including Islamists and non-Islamists.
Okay. Doctor, there is a question from the Professor Aydın from Turkey. He is actually wrote about the Turkish Islamic movements. And it is said, his question is, it is said that the members of the Muslim Brotherhood in some countries have no religious sensitivity. Is this just a propaganda of opponents, or is it inherent in social movements? Or should all members of Muslim Brotherhood be expected to be religious?
This is a complex question, actually, and it should be answered by the Brotherhood themselves to what extent they are religious. But I would say the following: political parties or social movements or religious movements, when they start to be included in the political process, they change. And by change, I mean that this can be ideological change, political change, cultural change. So your position and your ideas while you are in the opposition change once you came to power. And this is the case, for instance, with the Nahda party in Tunisia. If you go back and look at Nahda's views and ideas before they came to power, you'd find difference between what they have right now. Now they became part of the state, In the past, they were excluded from the state. And some people would accuse al-Nahda, they are not anymore Islamist movement. They don't have this kind of feature anymore. Again, it depends on how you define Islam as a reference for you in everyday life. If you ask Al-Ghannouchi, he would say that this is exactly what Islam tells us to do, to be part of the state and to engage and to try to change it from within. If you ask someone else to say no, they drifted from Islam according to his understanding. So it's a very, very tough question. But again, it depends on how these movements define Islam. But it's a very challenging question for them as well.
Okay. Doctor,
can I ask how much time we still have? Because
I would
now
like
we are more than 1 hour and a half. So
yes, I would like to say now this is last but not least question.
Okay.
From Saiful Islam. I'm sure that you know him.
As far as from Islam, that's fine. Yeah, of course I know him.
Thank you, Dr. Khalil, for this great academic lecture. My question is, do you think that a new generation can come up inside the Jama'ah again with new vision and organizational and ideological aspects?
Wow, okay, that's a good question from Saif. I think yes, it's possible, but this generation will not come out of nothing. You have to have an environment that would help this generation to come and to be influential. At the moment, I don't see this either within the movement or within Egypt. Within the movement is fractured now, is divided across different lines, ideological, political, religious, because it's under severe repression. As I said, this might be the first time that the Brotherhood would face such repression, even comparing to Nasser's days in 50s and 60s. This is unprecedented repression this time.
Is it worse than Nasser?
I think it's worse than Nasser. Again, I said in the beginning that we might need to wait to hear from people who are now in prison if it happened and they came out of prison during our lifetime. I hope so. As scholars, we have time to study them. But I mean, if you're talking about 60,000 people in prison, this is massive. If you're talking about leaders are in exile now outside Egypt, this is the first time to have this on this large scale. So it's unprecedented times for the Muslim Brotherhood. So the movement is under severe pressure from within and from outside. When it comes to the Egyptian context itself, Egypt itself is under unprecedented authoritarian regime that thinks politics shouldn't exist in Egypt. This regime, the current regime, is anti-everything, anti-politics, anti-public life, anti-everything. Not only this regime doesn't hesitate to kill and to arrest its political opponents and to get rid of them by all means. So this is these are unusual times in Egypt. So without having political opening in Egypt, without having political process, I will not say democratic process, but at least political process, political opening, it's very difficult to speak of a new generation that would come out of any movement, let alone the Brotherhood. However, when I was conducting research over the last couple of years about the Brotherhood, particularly in exile, either in Turkey, in the UK, in other places, you can find new ideas among them. Of course, I mean, you can find, different attitudes, those who are still in the movement, those who left the movement. So, but those are still Islamic. They definitely have different views from the leadership. They are more self-criticized. I mean, they criticize themselves. self-assessment. They have this kind of self-assessment. They don't shy away from saying that they did mistakes and they need to learn from them. So they have the courage that doesn't exist with their leaders to criticize themselves and to rethink and to reassess and to revisit their views and ideas and to be more open. But again, we cannot speak about generation without having the context that would help this to emerge.
Again, thank you very much, Dr. Khalil. And I think we lost your voice again, once again. Can you hear us? Okay, no problem. Let me close the session. Thank you very much for the all audience from Algeria, I know, from Tunisia, from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and from UK. Thank you very much to listening us. Thank you very much, Dr. Khalil, to joining us and accepting us. This is honor us. We cannot hear you. Sorry, but we will hopefully we will meet you again. And thanks a lot. You can now close the session from your top. Thank you very much. Bye bye.